Welcome to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast with John and Hannah.
Hi.
And today, as per the result of our recent Twitter poll, we're going to be looking at the Fog Giant.
So, let's start at the beginning. What are Fog Giants like in first edition? Fiend Folio, is it?
That's right, yeah. Fiend Folio, that's the book we're currently working through at the minute, produced by TSR UK. Okay, so it describes Fog Giants as being cousins to Cloud Giants, which we'll touch on in a little bit. And if on very rare occasion as many as 6 Fog Giants are encountered, they'll always be accompanied by a Cloud Giant. They've got very keen hearing and highly developed senses of smell, which makes them very difficult to surprise. They also have the ability to blend into fog, giving them an 80% chance of surprise. Seems a little bit unlikely, but they inhabit foggy areas such as marshes, swamps, dense forests and places near the sea, so like the coast. Fog Giants have milk-white skin, silvery white hair and black penetrating eyes. They love massive ornate swords and prefer armour made from white dragon hide, presumably because it blends in with that whole alabaster colour scheme they've got going on. Mm-hmm. In melee, they either fight with these massive swords or with their fists. Unlike all giants, adult Fog Giants, can hurl rocks for a great distance, inflicting 2 to 20 points of damage if they hit. They also have a 45% chance of catching like similar-sized rocks and stuff if they're thrown at them. Mm-hmm. It says here randomly, their armour, if worn, has no effect on their armour class, which is always treated as 1. Now, obviously, this is first edition AD&D, so it's THACO, so lower armour class is better. So 1's like 1 step down from like...
Perfect.
Yeah, I wouldn't say unhittable, you do get some of minuses.
You need a natural 20 to hit
it's pretty damn good, I'm not going to lie to you. Fog Giants speak their alignment language in their own particular dialect of giant language, unintelligible to all other giants except for the Cloud Giants. Okay, so that's Fog Giants in the Fiend Folio. Now, we mentioned they're sort of like distant cousins, or they're distantly related to Cloud Giants, which I know are in the first ed AD&D Monster Manual. So do you want to give us a bit of a flavour of what Cloud Giants are like in first edition AD&D, Hannah?
They're less common than the other kinds of giants.
So that's like fire giants and frost giants and whatnot.
Yeah. They live in crude castles on top of mountains or on magical cloud islands.
Get that Jack and the Beanstalk vibe in.
They have 1 to 4 spotted lions as pet guards.
Alright, that's random.
They can hurl rocks, same as the other ones. 60% chance to catch missiles. Keen sense of smell. And then it just gives you some instructions on basically how to organise the group of them. So if you've got 1, it'll probably be male. If you've got 2, there's a 75% chance that the second one is female.
Okay.
And that the others are young giants, so obviously a family group there. 10% of Cloud Giants are very intelligent. These will be the ones found dwelling on cloud islands.
Makes sense.
And they are able to levitate themselves with an additional weight of up to 20,000 gold pieces per day.
Okay. So just to jump back to the Fog Giant in the Fiend Folio, like a lot of the monsters in the Fiend Folio, it only gets like a very small sort of black and white sort of picture, which seems to be like the standard for the first edition monster manuals. And in this it shows like a sort of an almost like caveman, sort of like primitive like figure.
There's something very sort of Ray Harryhausen about the drawing.
Yeah, he's wearing this like scale armour, his mouth's open in like a scream, you can see like a couple of like fanged teeth, he's got like sort of what looks to me like vaguely dreadlocked hair, and he's holding like a huge boulder above his head, and there's other suggestive text just suggesting mist sort of swirling around his legs, which it's not the best artwork I've ever seen, but like a lot of these first edition AD&D artworks, it's got that sort of like that old school charm to it, hasn't it?
Whereas the Cloud Giant is drawn sort of almost Grecian, with his like toga looking.
Yeah, and he's
thing.
leaning on a column.
Yeah, and he's just drawn leaning on a massive club.
Okay.
So, what about second ed?
Yeah, after first edition, Fog Giants appeared again in the second edition AD&D Monster Manual, and we get like a slightly different sort of artwork there. It's a big sort of muscly, pale-skinned figure wearing basically like a big nappy and holding a club and like with a couple of belts around him. But other than that, it's just like bulging muscles. Think the sort of like outfit that like Arnold Schwarzenegger wears in like the Conan films.
I was going to say it does kind of look like they've put the head of Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future onto the body of Arnold Schwarzenegger from Conan.
Yeah, the haircut of the Fog Giant in the Monster Manual is a bit mad. But what else does it say about Fog Giants, love?
So the description is very similar. It specifically says that they have no facial hair.
That's random.
Yeah. Massive ornate clubs now rather than swords.
Yeah. Seems like they're trying to emphasise a more primitive vibe, which would go with the artwork.
And now we're talking about hunting groups rather than families.
Right. Yeah, so more tribal.
Chance of catching weapons, throwing rocks, keen hearing, highly developed sense of smell.
So meaning they're less likely to be surprised again.
Caves, it says access to their caves, implying that they live in caves.
Which wasn't actually mentioned in the Fiend Folio. It gave you like a sort of broad sketch of like this is the sort of terrain they like, but it didn't actually mention anything about where they live. But as we've said in the Monster Manual, because each monster's getting like a page write-up here, whereas the write-ups are a lot smaller in the Fiend Folio, you tend to get slightly more elaborated sort of like habitat and society information.
Access to their caves and regular hunting camps are often protected by deadfalls of rocks or logs, which could be released by a carefully thrown rock at the first sign of an attack against them.
That's quite cool, and that makes sort of sense. I mean, let's face it, if you're a giant and you're like the shiznit when it comes to like hurling rocks, like you've got really good aim, why would you not go, I'm going to set up all of my traps so I can be stood in the centre, and when I want to set them off, I just reach down for this convenient pile of rocks and and off the traps all go.
It's also reminiscent of the sort of Norse storm giant type things.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Where like a massive storm's gone through and it's left all these trees knocked over. So obviously when people looked at it later, they're like, must have been something massive gone through here, must have been a giant.
Yeah, and didn't they used to say that like thunderstorms were like giants arguing or fighting or something like that? So, and I suppose if you think about the sound of like big thrown boulders and like crashing traps, you could sort of, that could sort of be interpreted as like a sort of thunderous sound. So yeah, that's quite cool. I like that.
Yes, so fog giant families live in caves, canyons or thickets.
Thickets? How big a thicket have you got to get to fit a fog giant family in it?
So it says. In the most inaccessible areas of marsh, swamp, forest or coast, usually hunting groups ranging up to 12 miles from their home, and generally formed by giants of similar alignment. Some stuff about silver treasure. That they have to consume large quantities of food to support themselves.
Makes sense.
And so obviously that means that sometimes they fall out with each other. I'm sure I saw that somewhere. Yeah, territorial disputes flare up between groups, especially in times of bad hunting. And that they mark their territories with big markers of boulders and logs.
One thing I can see there as well that looks quite interesting is it says that by tradition a young giant may not mate until he's obtained at least one large ornament of silver. Usually the young giant joins with several others in a quest to find one. So that's quite interesting, you know, like a little bit of like, giving you a bit of like the tribal culture and like a obviously it doesn't go into detail because it's only like a one-page write-up, but as a suggestion there's actually a society there rather than just like, oh, we are a tribe of generic big monsters for you to come and head. So that's quite interesting, and I wonder if that's going to be something that's going to be developed as we like look into the sort of 3rd edition book that's got fog giants in.
And the thing about the markings with stones and boulders is very reminiscent of one of the things that I found when I was looking up about fog giants on the internet and whether there are any myths relating to fog giants.
Oh, right, okay.
And I came across a very weird cartoon, which I've now closed. Oh no, there we go. Called Inui, which is kind of like an Inuit version of Dora the Explorer.
All right, okay.
Where she explains a little bit about the Inuksuk, which are these like sort of monolithic landmarks that are all over North Canada.
Okay.
And they've been built by the Inuit tribe to give them like markers so they can find their way in the fog.
Oh, right, okay, that's cool.
And many of them are sort of humanoid, but as with many things from many of the cultures that have been like utterly destroyed over the last couple of 100 years, it's not really clear what stories are like their old stories and what are stuff that the Christian missionaries have made up.
Yeah.
And nobody's really sure what's actually there. But yeah, this thing about the markers just reminded me of it.
But yeah, it's interesting as well, because that brings another thing to mind. I mean, I sort of mentioned it when I was being a bit sort of like scathing about like thickets hiding fog giants. And you mentioned there specifically that like, the Inuits potentially built these huge markers because they could see them through the fog and it helped guide them about and everything. That makes perfect sense. But it also makes me think, I know they're like all silvery white and whatever, they're the fog giants, that's fair enough. But I'm thinking like hiding in fog, really, 80% chance of not being seen. Because don't get me wrong, if you've got like pale skin and they're absolutely white, however, they are still a solid object. So if you're like seeing them in fog and there's some light coming through the fog, you will see them as like a shadowy presence in the fog.
I would like to remind you of that time when we were driving in Scotland.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're right.
The fog was so thick that we had to use the sat-nav to see the road. I would like to remind you of the many, many LARP events that we've done where you've worn a robe/cloak made out of old dust sheets that's just off-white, and how close you can get to people when it's just a bit misty. Even in the middle of the day.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and Hannah's absolutely right. We did go to Scotland at one point where we were driving. It was so foggy we couldn't see the road at all. We had to use a sat-nav. We had to stop several times. We were worried about how dangerous it was getting. And also, this isn't to cast any shade on my ability to wear like white robes and like murder people in the fog at LARP, because I do quite enjoy that. However, I'm not a giant. The road was not a giant. I like to think when we're in Scotland, even with that fog, if some sort of humongous giant capable of throwing like half mountains
John, that was
had loomed up,
you couldn't see 12 feet away.
I don't care if you're a giant, like an actual proper giant. There is no way you're not at least going to go, what's that like big shape over there in the fog? I'm not buying it personally. I'm not buying it.
You just read it as a mountain or a tree until it moves.
And the mountain's starting to move.
Exactly. That's
actually,
like
that
where
could be
all
pretty
these
cool.
giant stories are.
But yeah, I'm still not buying it. But to be honest, it's D&D. We're in a magical world. Do you know what? I think if I'd have been writing the Fog Giant, all I would have done is I'd have put just like a cheeky little line in there, not even any game effect. I'd have just put a cheeky line in there saying like, when they're in the mist, like it gets thicker and more sort of like difficult to see through. And if there'd have been something like that written in there, I'd have been like, oh fine, it's some minor magical ability they've got, but they don't seem to have any magic. So them sort of staying like concealed in a fog seems a bit weird to me. And that's probably how I'd rationalise it in my game.
They do a lot of hunting as well.
That's not magical.
No, but if they're going to be doing hunting, then they're going to have to learn how to sneak up on their prey.
That's fair enough. But I think probably I'd use the rules as is if I was using a fog giant in my game. But I'd probably just rationalise it as, okay, they've got some very like minor instinctual control over the fog or something like that. You know, and it becomes thicker, and that makes it possible to hide them. Because that would seem more likely to me, and it doesn't seem sort of infeasible because we're like a magical D&D world.
So what about third ed then? Is there anything different?
Okay, well, in third ed 3.5, the fog giant didn't reappear again until the Monstrous Compendium Monsters of Faerun book. As with a lot of things in sort of the third edition onwards, they're linked to a particular type of elemental plane. We're told they're linked to the elemental plane of air. Mm-hmm. They've got a whole bucket of hit points. They're described as being armed with great clubs, so the swords are gone. As with second ed, it's all about the clubs now. They get a few skills like climb, hide, jump, listen, spot. The sort of things that would go with a sort of hunter-gatherer, that makes sense. They get alertness, again, makes sense. Cleave and power attack as feats, so they deal more damage with the clubs. Mm-hmm. They're described as lairing in temperate marshes and forests, and you either find them as like a solitary giant, a hunting group of 2 to 5, a raiding party with some cloud giants, or a clan, which is like 11 to 20 giants.
Have you got something to add?
Obviously, Phantom's decided to come in, like, add a few meows of wisdom to the episode.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So we're told that, again, that fog giants are relatives of cloud giants. They're more intelligent and stealthy than they're usually given credit for. They stand about 24 feet tall, with tree trunk-sized legs and overdeveloped arms. They've got milk-white skin, which aids their ability to blend in the fog, and silvery white flowing hair. They're keeping the whole thing that they grow no facial hair, although apparently they have ample hair on their arms, legs and chests, so that makes it seem even weirder to me. They prefer to wear no armour. So again, the sort of dragon scale armour it talked about in the Fiend Folio is gone now. And at least, they just say here, at least one band wears armour made from white dragon hide. So they've sort of retconned that a little bit to say, oh yeah, the ones they talked about in the Fiend Folio, that's just one particular tribe. Most of them don't. They prefer to attack from cover, favouring heavy fog naturally, initially relying on rock hurling to scatter their opponents, then charging into melee with clubs flying. They can catch rock. Here we go, this is what I'm talking about. They've got an extraordinary ability, hide in fog. In foggy conditions, fog giants have an unusual ability to blend into the mists. In light fog, they gain a +4 bonus to hide. In dense fog, it goes up to +7. And these numbers include the penalty for the giant's size. So as we were talking about just then, obviously the people who did 3.5 are thinking the same way, and they've rationalised that ability to sort of camouflage themselves as like a magical or extraordinary ability, which I think's pretty cool. And as is often the way in 3.5 here, they've sort of lumped it together with another giant called the Failing Giant, which is tied into the Forgotten Realms, sort of warped stone giant, but we won't go into that. We're told that some fog giant groups include sorcerers or clerics, and fog giant clans live in caves, canyons, or again, those massive 12-foot thickets that are apparently everywhere in D&D worlds, or in the most inaccessible areas of marsh, forest, or coast. They hunt in groups gravitating towards other giants with similar alignments, though a single clan usually includes individuals of a different alignment, which is different to what it said previously, because it said they don't get on with other people, didn't it?
And I think me and the cat both agree that if you've looked at the map of Faerun, there's plenty of forest space to have some 12-foot thickets in.
That's it, man. Although, to be honest, every time I mention it, I keep thinking of the band Darkest of the Hillside thickets, to be honest. That's all I can think of. So, can we think of any ways that you could potentially use these creatures in your game, rather than just like, oh, here come the giants, get your magic items out?
Well, probably they would be something that you'd need to negotiate with rather than fight to make them interesting to me.
Yeah.
I did like the idea of the group of young giants in second ed going out to like get some silver so that they can go and propose to their girlfriends.
Yeah, I do like the idea of
that
like...
That could make for a really good little story.
Yeah, I do like the idea of like maybe the adventurers are hired like, some giants broke into my treasure vault and stole all my silver. And they're like, evil giants, let's go and get them. And when they get there, they find out it's actually like effectively like a bunch of like lads, like young giants who've basically just sort of like gone, they're also like the spotty like teenagers of the giant world. And we're like... today I'm going to be a real man. And they've gone into like they've gone in and they've stole all the silver and they're trying to like melt it down to make into like a big silver like plate or something to like take back to their tribe to prove they're like a real man, basically, sort of test of adulthood. Because then, I mean, again, all of this stuff falls down if you've got like murder hobo player characters who just like kill the giants, take the treasure. But if you've got even slightly moral like player characters, unless the giants have killed loads of people, you've then got the moral thing of like, well, do you just sort of say, we'll keep the silver until you've passed your test and then we'll have it back? Because you can sort of empathise with them a little bit.
Now, similarly, I would like to pitch the exact same story, but as a stag night from the giants' point of view.
Amazing.
For your murder hobos who do just want to be like, lads, and go and stamp on things. Let them be 24 feet tall while they do it.
I do like the idea of how there's the thing about when people go on stag parties, you will see people like throwing like cans of lager about and whatever and stuff like that, and people like staggering around like wearing like stupid stuff. I do like to imagine like a group of like fog giants, and like the first players encounter them is like somewhat like this huge rock comes like flying out the fog and like totals a village. And then they just hear this like booming, bellowing voice going, I bet I could throw one farther than you. And it's just like a load of like giants who are like p***ed up. Maybe they've like broke into like some brewery or something. I don't know. They've drank the dwarf's brewery dry, and now they're just like, lads,
smashing a beer barrel against
their
forehead,
exactly. Like smashing a whole cottage against the side of their face, and then they're just like, what shall we do now? Hey, look, there's a pile of rocks over there, lads. How far do you reckon you can throw one of them? And then just like having a bit of a contest. And obviously the end result of that would be pretty much the same. Like, you've got to stop them giants like destroying everywhere. But I think that adding that extra element of humour, it's just like an extra little dimension to the giants, rather than just like, we are evil giants, oi, 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 and you go and kill them, which is pretty boring, let's face it. But again, I do very much like this idea of first you see of them is something like that, and just a big rock comes out of the fog.
Yeah, that is a really like nice image.
And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember the exact thing, but I'm sure when I was playing 5th edition for a while with like Andre Martinez and his group, which are a great group of people, he was running one of the 5th edition adventures. I can't, like the adventure sort of path things, I can't remember the name of it, but there's one bit where you arrive to like protect this town, and there's like old stones like sunk into the ground from like an old giant attack. And I always thought that was pretty cool. And again, if you've got fog giants, it could be like any giant, could be an excellent reasoning for like, there's a place with like loads of like weird standing stones that like old civilizations have maybe like worshipped or used. And you can say like, maybe there's legends about like giants used to have like rock throwing contests and stuff like that. As there's legends in the real world, but maybe they're true in your D&D world. I mean, who knows?
Mm-hmm. So another way you could use it would be to have it as not necessarily a random encounter, but a planned encounter on a journey.
Yeah.
You don't know that there are fog giants in this place, but you go through this place, and whether you encounter them, what you do about it, whether you get on with the rest of your journey, pretty much down to the players. But just through what we've read through there, you've got like some really good eerie descriptions for a spooky place. You're walking through this thicket, and then like the mist comes up to knee level.
Thickets. She's obsessed with thickets, listeners. I don't know what's going on.
And you've got like the knee level mist, and as you say, standing stones, monoliths of some sort, and then as you go like a bit deeper into it and the mist gets up to waist height, suddenly you accidentally trigger one of the traps that they've set up to protect this place.
Yeah, that's true.
and then you've got to deal with like a pile of rocks falling on the group or whatever it might be, and then maybe you encounter like some footprints or some leftovers from the hunting or whatever, realise where you are, and you've literally just wandered into the middle of these fog giants' territory.
Yeah.
What are you going to do now?
I've also got an idea which would involve a slight sort of tweaking of the mechanics, but not too much. We've talked before about how in 3rd edition it's become an extraordinary ability that they can camouflage themselves in fog. I think maybe like, I'd quite be interested in like pushing that a bit further, because there is the spell like Misty Step in D&D, which effectively allows you to like teleport yourself from like one place to another, like disappearing into like the fog and stepping out of another. Now, I was thinking, what if fog giants, obviously they move at normal speed, etc., but what if, when they're camouflaged, it's not just because they've got pale skin, what if they actually become part of the fog? Whilst they're moving, so they have like a sort of mist form, you know, a la the old like vampire turning into a cloud of mist. It doesn't mean they can move any faster. It might not even mean that they can avoid damage. You know, if someone sees them, they can probably still attack them. But I just think that's a cool idea if you wanted to maybe do a bit more sort of like a horror style vibe. You know, because I can't get out of my, as soon as I heard fog giants, I couldn't get out of my head like the idea of like The Fog, you know, the film.
Yeah.
Where like the pirates just seem to like form out of the mist and they emerge out of it. And I'm like, can you imagine how like terrifying that would be if those pirates emerged out of the mist and they were like 24 foot tall or whatever, and you were just like, oh, there's one mountain, and then you're like, why then have 3 mountains? And why are 2 of them coming towards me quickly, holding big clubs going, let's. So, that's been our episode on fog giants. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to leave us a message, perhaps comment on this or another episode, maybe you've got some suggestions for things you'd like to hear on the podcast, you can get in touch with us by either leaving us a voicemail at SpeakPipe, there's a link in the description of this show, or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Until we see you next time, take care, stay safe, and keep gaming.
Bye.
Let's.